Hi, I'm Vanessa from Jettle, and today we'll be talking about the key themes in Margaret Edson's play Wit. But before we jump into this video, make sure you subscribe to our channel and check out our website, jettle.com, for our more comprehensive resources. The key themes of Edson's Wit can be described as identity, love or human connection, as well as mortality and suffering. And we're going to break down these three themes today. First off is identity, one of the key aspects of the entire play, because the main character, Vivian, is a really self-reflexive person. She's constantly reflecting on and deconstructing and constructing her own identity. And much of her identity is attached to her job as an academic and a professor, particularly as an expert on John Donne's poetry. So she uses that particular part of herself to define who she is as a person. And throughout the play, we see the way that her identity is stripped down and deconstructed as a result of her suffering and her experience of cancer. Edson puts Vivian in an institutional setting of a cancer ward where she is undergoing a trial for a new type of therapy. This basically is done to show the slow dehumanization and removal of her identity. And it's right there from the beginning of the play where she's referred to not as professor or doctor, but as Ms. Baring by one of her doctors. And this continues. We see this over and over again as her role as a professor is slowly degraded as she becomes more and more a patient rather than a professor. So we see this diminishing of her identity by her doctors, and gradually we also realize that Vivian herself comes to realize how flimsy her construction of her own identity was by basing it so much in her accomplishments and her academic achievements and never giving time to develop her identity beyond that. And only when she experiences suffering and comes face to face with her own mortality does she begin to question her identity and the things that she once valued as being important. The other key theme, which of course connects with the first, is human connection and compassion or kindness and love, the things that make life bearable and make life good. At the start of the play, we see Vivian does not have any time for human connection or compassion. She's not interested in it. She's asked by her doctor whether she has a support network, and we discover quickly that she has no spouse, no friends, no family. She's totally alone. And she almost prides herself on this, as if she sees it as an achievement. Unfortunately, as the play progresses and she really begins suffering, she begins to realize a little too late how important human connection and compassion is. She's treated horrifically by her doctors. She's almost disregarded, and she begins to reflect that this was the way she treated her own students as well, that she was really cruel to her students, that she never extended human connection and kindness to them. The tragedy of the play is that only two characters afford Vivian this kindness in her palliative state as she's dying. The first is her nurse, Susie, who, while maybe not being as accomplished as the doctors or Vivian as an academic, is one of the only characters who truly understands that kindness and compassion is more important than our achievements and our credentials. And the other person is Vivian's old professor, Ashford. And Professor Ashford visits Vivian in hospital right before she dies, having found out from the university that she was a palliative patient. And she's the only other person that shows Vivian any kindness and is Vivian's only visitor. And this really emphasizes that building compassion and connection is integral to having a great human experience, to having a human experience that can live up to the suffering and face mortality in a way that's dignified. And Vivian, unfortunately, doesn't get to experience that because she never really invested in having human relationships. And now, the theme that dominates the others and is perhaps the most important throughout the whole play is mortality and suffering. It gives meaning to the other themes because Vivian is experiencing her own mortality. It's experiencing her imminent death. She begins to really reflect on what makes her identity important and what makes her life important. And she begins to realize that without human connection, without kindness, none of these things matter. She's lived a life that's devoid of true human experiences and lived truth. And particularly with her ongoing suffering, at the start of the play, we see her quite arrogant about her ability to take suffering. She thinks she's going to be really tough in the face of her cancer. And the reason for this is she considers herself to be an expert in mortality because she is a researcher and a professor in John Donne's poetry. And Donne's poetry was all about mortality. So she has this belief that she is an expert, she'll have no problem facing her own death, and it is only as she begins to suffer and experience her palliative cancer state that she realizes that her facing death is not a time for what she calls verbal swordplay, kind of referencing the way John Donne writes about death with great intellectualism and wit. She begins to realize that death is only really understood and its lessons are understood when you experience it firsthand with lived experience. And she begins to turn away from those earlier values of intellectualism and sort of mental games and challenges and begin to embrace the importance of compassion and even self-compassion as she comes to accept all of her past wrongs and the way that she chose to live her life. For this reason, we can say that all of these themes interconnect or intersect, as is the case in most texts. And you might choose to connect the themes in your analysis. In this particular example, we have two sentences, one of which is discussing a quote about her understandings of mortality and then breaking it down in the second sentence. So it begins with, as the self-reflexive postmodern narrator, Vivian tells the audience, we are discussing life and death, and not in the abstract either. We are discussing life, and my death. The repetition makes use of the possessive determiner my before the words life and death to emphasize Vivian's epiphany that mortality is not an abstract concept, but a humbling human experience. So over the course of this analysis, we've connected with Vivian as the postmodern narrator, the fact that this is her identity, a self-reflexive woman who is deconstructing her understandings of truth, life, death. And we've linked that to this particular quote where she's telling the audience and breaking the fourth wall that they're not just discussing life and death the way that she would in the classroom to her students, they're discussing my life and my death. And we then break this up. Immediately we jump into our techniques here, the repetition, the possessive determiner of my. We get straight to the point to show how this quote is illustrating the theme of identity and mortality and the realization that Vivian has had, that epiphany, that she's realized that mortality is not something that you can just stand up and talk about in a tutorial classroom setting. It's something that people experience and live and gives meaning to our human experience. So in this way, you'll have the choice. You can connect your themes. You can choose to just talk about one theme in a particular paragraph. But the great thing is that all these themes do intersect and connect, which makes it even easier for you to adapt your analysis to the question. You might also notice in this second sentence, we haven't just said this quote is showing how mortality is a theme in the text. We haven't just dumped the word mortality in there. We've extended that context in this second half of the sentence to emphasize Vivian's epiphany that mortality is not an abstract concept, but a humbling human experience. We're taking it further than just referencing what the theme is. We're providing an understanding and analysis of the concept itself and extending the way that you're talking about it in the essay. So try not to just dump your theme at the end there and like a grenade, let it explode and move on. You want to actually deconstruct it, explain it, and connect it back to your question using the keywords. If you've liked this content, make sure that you subscribe to our channel and head over to jedl.com where you'll find even more comprehensive resources on these texts.